The wind had a certain bite to it that night in Fairview. One of those nights when the air feels sharper than usual, as if it's warning you to stay inside. Officer Daniel Mercer had been patrolling for nearly 6 hours, the usual routine of slow drives past shuttered storefronts and silent residential streets. Fairview wasn't a busy town at the best of times, and in late November, after midnight, it felt more like a ghost town than a community. At 2:08 a.m., the radio crackled. Unit 14, respond to a disturbance at 1918 Claymore Street. Caller reports someone in the yard. Possible trespasser. There was something strange about the dispatcher's tone. Measured, careful, almost as if she were reluctant to send him. Daniel keyed the mic. Unit 14 en route. As he turned onto Claymore Street, he immediately noticed another patrol car parked near the curb in front of the address. The headlights were off, but the roof light bar reflected faintly in the thin mist hanging in the air. An officer was standing at the gate, speaking to an elderly woman in a faded maroon robe. At first, Daniel felt a small surge of relief. Backup was already here. But then his eyes narrowed. The man's uniform was wrong. Not in a glaring, obvious way, but subtly off. The fabric seemed heavier, the stitching a bit different, and the dark blue looked more like black under the street lamp. The badge was oval-shaped instead of the standard shield design Fairview had used for years. Daniel stepped out of his cruiser, boots crunching on the frosty pavement. The other officer turned to look at him. His movements were too deliberate, his posture rigid. Evening, the man said in a flat tone. His voice had no warmth, no inflection. I've got it handled. Daniel stopped a few steps short. What precinct are you from? The man didn't answer. He simply gave the old woman a strange, almost forced smile before turning and walking toward the side of the house. Daniel glanced at the woman. Ma'am, do you know that officer? Her brow furrowed. What officer? You've been talking to me for the last 10 minutes. The cold that had been in the air now seemed to settle in his chest. Ma'am, Daniel said carefully, was it me you were talking to? Yes, same height, same build, same face, but your uniform's different now, and you look warmer somehow. Daniel keyed his mic. Dispatch, can you confirm if another unit is here at Claymore? After a pause. Negative, you're the only unit on that call. Daniel told the woman to stay inside and lock her doors. Then he drew his flashlight and headed toward the side of the house where the man had gone. The beam of light cut through the mist, illuminating the peeling paint of the siding, the brittle grass, the faint puff of his own breath. The backyard was empty, no movement, no footprints in the frost. But then, just at the far edge of the yard, he caught sight of something. A figure slipping through a gap in the old fence. Daniel's training kicked in. Police! Stop! He broke into a run. The figure moved quickly, far quicker than seemed possible, vanishing through the gap without a sound. When Daniel reached the fence, he shone his flashlight through to the alley beyond. Nothing. No running footsteps. No vehicle. No echo of movement. The silence was so complete, it pressed in on him. Returning to the front, Daniel found the elderly woman peeking from her doorway. Her voice shook as she spoke. That man, he said his name was Officer Daniel Mercer. He said he'd been dead for 5 years but came back to finish his shift. The words lodged in Daniel's mind like a splinter. 5 years ago to the day, another Fairview officer named Daniel Mercer, no relation, had been shot responding to a domestic disturbance at this very address. He'd been wearing the older-style uniform. Witnesses had said he died in the yard, just steps from where Daniel had seen the figure vanish. The rest of the night, Daniel patrolled with an uneasy feeling that he was no longer the only one covering Fairview's streets. Somewhere in the cold darkness, that other officer, pale-faced, silent, was still walking his beat. A ghost with a badge, answering calls that no living officer would ever receive. And in the back of Daniel's mind, one thought kept gnawing at him. If the dead could keep working their shifts, maybe the next time that radio crackled, it wouldn't be for him. Every precinct has its strange cases, the ones that don't fit neatly into reports, the ones veterans tell to new recruits in low voices just to see if they flinch. At the Eastbrook Police Department, that story was the 317 dispatch call. It started decades ago. No one knew exactly when, but the earliest log anyone could find was from 1982. Always the same date, February 9th. Always the same time, 3:17 a.m. And always the same number showing up on the caller ID. The voice on the line? Sometimes it was a woman, sometimes a man, and once, a child. But the address was always the same, 417 Brookfield Lane. There was only one problem. Brookfield Lane didn't have a 417. The street ended at number 415, an old single-story house belonging to a retired school teacher. Beyond that was nothing but a vacant lot and dense woods. Most officers dismissed it as a prank, maybe some bored local with too much time. But the oddest part was this. When the call came in, the station's temperature sensors would dip, radios would crackle with static, and the person answering the phone would often swear they could hear something behind the voice, a kind of wet breathing, like someone was standing right next to the receiver. Sergeant Daniel Harker wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. 12 years on the force had hardened him, but in his early days as a rookie, he'd overheard older officers talking about the 317 call, the way they avoided answering it. He'd laughed back then. But over the years, the pattern, the consistency, and the unease in their voices made him wonder. February 9th rolled around again, and Harker was on the night shift. At 3:16, he told his partner, Officer Ruiz, "If it comes in, we're taking it." Ruiz raised an eyebrow. "You serious? Nobody goes to Brookfield Lane, that's the rule." "Rules are for things we understand," Harker replied. At 3:17 exactly, the phone rang. The sound was piercing, shrill in the quiet of the station. Caller ID, the same number as always. Harker answered on speaker. There was a burst of static and then a voice, a woman's this time. Soft, trembling. "Please send someone before it happens again." Before what could happen? Harker leaned closer to the mic. "Ma'am, who is this? What's your emergency?" No answer, just breathing. Then the faintest sound, 3 slow knocks. They grabbed their jackets and drove out to Brookfield Lane. The fog was thick, swallowing the cruiser's headlights. They passed number 415, the last house on the road, its porch light flickering. Then they stopped. The vacant lot was just as everyone had said. Tall grass, scattered trash, and the black silhouettes of skeletal trees. They stepped out. The moment Harker's boots hit the edge of the lot, the air changed. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees. His breath came out in quick white clouds. "Dan, look," Ruiz said, pointing ahead. Through the fog, a shape began to take form. A house, 2 stories, peeling paint, windows like dead eyes. It hadn't been there seconds ago. They moved closer. The structure loomed over them, its front door hanging slightly open. The smell hit them first. Damp wood, rot, and something metallic. Inside, the floors groaned. The walls were streaked with handprints, small ones, large ones, some smeared, some pressed deep into the peeling wallpaper. The sound of crying drifted from upstairs. It was faint, almost too faint to hear, but it pulled them like a rope. They climbed the staircase, each step creaking loud in the silence. The crying stopped. A door at the end of the hall was shut, deep gouges carved into it. The words, "Not again," were scratched over and over, some letters overlapping. Harker tried the knob. It was freezing as if it had been kept in ice. From behind the door came a soft whisper, "You're too late." Then came the sound, a low, dragging thump, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Ruiz reached for the handle again, but the door slammed open on its own. There was no room beyond it now, just blackness, an endless void that seemed to pull at the air around them. And then, from somewhere deep inside that dark, they heard the same 3 knocks from the phone call. The hallway light flickered, and suddenly, they were standing outside. The house was gone. The lot was empty again. They checked their watches. 3:17 a.m. exactly. When they returned to the station, dispatch told them something chilling. The call had never disconnected. In fact, it was still on the line. It was supposed to be a routine overnight security check. Officer Daniel Price had been with the department for nearly 15 years, and in all that time, he had seen his fair share of strange calls and unsettling encounters. But nothing, no training, no late-night shift, prepared him for the night he was sent to the old 7th Precinct building. The precinct had been shut down for over a decade after a budget cut merged it with a newer facility downtown. Officially, the building was under renovation, but every officer knew the truth. No one wanted to work there. Strange reports had circulated for years. Doors slamming on their own, phones ringing despite being disconnected, shadows moving through empty hallways. Price didn't believe in ghost stories. He figured it was just an old building settling, or the product of bored rookies trying to scare each other. But on that cold November night, when the dispatcher asked if he could check on a triggered motion alarm at the old precinct, he agreed without hesitation. The first thing he noticed upon arriving was the silence. The streets outside were dead quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. The front door to the precinct was still locked, so he keyed in the code the department kept for emergencies and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and smelled faintly of mildew. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on peeling paint, overturned desks, and yellowed memos still pinned to corkboards. He could almost imagine the place buzzing with activity. Officers chatting over coffee, phones ringing, typewriters clacking. But now it was a shell, frozen in time. As he moved deeper into the building, the motion detector's panel beeped again, indicating movement from the second floor. Price climbed the stairs slowly, his boots echoing against the cracked tile. Halfway up, he stopped. There was a voice. At first, it was faint, like a muffled radio transmission. He instinctively reached for the radio clipped to his vest, but it was silent. The voice wasn't coming from his equipment. It was coming from upstairs. Price continued cautiously, the sound growing clearer. It was a man's voice, speaking low and urgent, but the words were indistinct. When he reached the top of the stairs, the voice stopped. He swept his flashlight across the hallway, illuminating old holding cells with rusted bars, their doors hanging open. Then, from the far end of the hall, a light flickered. It was coming from the old captain's office. Price approached slowly, pushing the door open. The office was empty, but sitting on the desk was an ancient rotary phone, its receiver off the hook. The phone was clicking faintly, as if someone had just hung up from a call. That's when he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. On the dusty glass window of the office door, letters had been written with a fingertip, clear as day. Leave. His gut told him to listen, but his training told him to investigate. Against his better judgment, he stayed. As he turned back toward the hallway, a loud slam echoed from downstairs. Price's flashlight flickered, and for a split second in the beam, he saw a figure, a man in a dated police uniform, face pale, eyes dark, standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at him. The figure didn't move. Price called out, demanding the man identify himself, but the figure simply stepped backward into the shadows until it was gone. By now, the air had turned icy cold, and every instinct screamed for him to get out. Price hurried downstairs, but halfway to the door, the overhead lights buzzed and flickered to life. All around him, phones began to ring. Every single desk phone in the station, their shrill tones overlapping into a deafening chorus. He bolted for the exit, the ringing following him until he burst into the freezing night air. When he filed his report, he left out most of the details, only noting, possible trespasser, no suspect found. But that night, as he lay in bed, something kept him awake. On his personal phone, one he kept on silent during patrol, was a missed call from an unknown number, time-stamped at the exact moment the phones in the old... If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.